Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Swati Rana. I teach in the English department at UCSB, and I'm very excited to be here today and participating in the Pandemic Book Club. Thank you to Brian Donnelly for organizing this and for inviting me. So I teach courses mostly in comparative ethnic literature and transnational American studies. I tend to look at writings by immigrants and other ethnic groups in the United States. And questions around identity and form. And I'm always interested in what literature offers us formally as a way of thinking through race, immigration, identity, belonging, mostly in the United States. And lately I've been reading in preparation for a poetry workshop that I'm teaching next quarter called Poems at the End of the World, which feels a little too close, a little too timely. In relation to where we are right now. But we'll be thinking about what it means to write poems right now, writing poems ourselves, and reading poets who are engaging with racial violence, economic inequality, fascist militancy, environmental degradation. What resources does poetry provide in this moment? Clarity, inspiration, critique. And so today I want to talk about Cathy Park Hong's Dance Revolution, which is, I guess, mirrored for you here. And this book was published in 2007, and it might be thought of in terms of a speculative poetics or a poetics of world making that imagines a world that's yet to come. And these projects are the opposite of escape, and indeed they're the most powerful when they invite us to re-engage with the present in new ways. So in Dance Revolution, a scholar arrives in the desert, which is a frontier resort city that's evocative of Las Vegas. There are strips of hotels modeled on the great tourist destinations of the world, whose opulence is kind of held together by violence, state suppression, unseen, exploited labor, and rebellion lurks around the boundaries of the city. The scholar in the book is called the historian, raised in Sierra Leone, who is searching out a hotel tour guide to make recordings of her voice. And the guide is a South Korean dissident from the 1980 Gwangju Uprising, a mass protest against military rule that was brutally suppressed with US support and is understood as a pivotal moment in the pro-democracy movement. So the book has these coordinates in these real historical events, and it begins with the chronology of the life of the guide, roughly following the arc of her life. So after the Gwangju Uprising, the guide moves to the desert, which is this sort of futuristic touristic town, where there's another uprising, the Year of Dance Revolution, which some of you will recognize as a popular video game from the 1990s. And people, whosoever's involved in this uprising is exiled to Newtown, which is outside the desert. And the guide eventually becomes, at this point in this, when we meet her in this collection, she's a senior guide for the St. Petersburg Hotel, even as she appears to give voice to the new resistance, the new revolution. And so there are two very different formal threads, and I'll even just kind of show you. I know you can't read on the screen, but there are these kind of long prose narratives towards the end of the sections titled Excerpt from the Historian's Memoir. And that's the historian's framing and commentary that's rendered mostly as interspersed prose between the poems. And so here you have a sense of the guide's commentary, which takes this poetic form, this stanzaic form, with line breaks and these ellipses that are interspersed throughout. And these poems are in Desert Creole, which is an amalgam of 300 different languages. And these ellipses, ... it turns out that the historian left the tapes out on the patio during the rain, and parts of the tapes were damaged. So then we have these gaps that we have to kind of piece together. So I'll begin by reading a portion from the opening just to set the scene, since I know that it has a lot of moving parts. And every time I come back to this work, I have to kind of map out this landscape and this moment. So, just a bit of reading, and then I'll talk a bit more about what I find so compelling about the book. Overall, the desert is the planned city of renewed wonders, a city of state-of-the-art hotels, modeled after the world's greatest cities, city whose decree is, there is difference only in degree. This city is the center of elsewhere, but perhaps that is not accurate. As the world shrinks, elsewhere begins to disappear. Revolutions happen all the time elsewhere, although we seem to think that revolutions exist in time capsules. Back then, they were an act of propulsion, of anguished, woodcut masses marching in cohesion. Now, in the desert, the pulse of unrest works unpredictably. In canny acts of sabotage engineered by exiled natives who crave for time to stand still. Here, rumors abound that migrant hotel employees are now joining them and tourists don't know who to trust. The city of rest is also the city of unrest. I'm a historian who arrived here to hear about a different unrest, a place once considered elsewhere, Gwangju. Gwangju is the provincial capital in the southern part of South Korea. After a dictatorial takeover in 1980, the citizens of Gwangju rose up to protest the coup, only to be brutally massacred by the US-backed Korean government. My father, who later moved on to become a physician for Doctors Without Borders in Sierra Leone, was part of that protest. But even to his death, he revealed nothing about his past life. And my own mother, a shy Midwestern woman, died before I turned 3. I'm a historian, you see, but history has always been stingy to me. Then I discovered that she moved to the desert after Gwangju, the woman my father loved before my mother. The woman whose pirated radio station led thousands into the streets during the uprising. Her radio speeches were pure and hypnotic in their urgency for us to rise up against the regime, said one civilian, my guide. I slipped out of the airport's sliding doors and squinted in the late afternoon sun. I could not make out any form, only refracted lobes of sunlight and the shadow flittings of tourists who just arrived. Then, wearing a ginger-colored wig and a navy pinstriped suit, she emerged out of an air-conditioned town car and invited me in. I pressed my recorder. On the hour-long ride to the hotel, she was silent until the remains of my tape squealed to its end. She then smiled, clasped my hand, and gave me a complimentary swim cap. When I puzzled over this gift, she hushed my question. She will give me a tour first. She introduced herself. Chun Soo-jin, last name first name lest, all the time known as ballhead Jong Nim, a zoologist Henrietta with falsetto slang, but you just call me guide. You might have noticed towards the end how I stumbled over the guide's words, and I debated whether or not to read them. They remind me of this phrase from Chiang Rai-Lee's native speaker, a scabrous mouthful. And that was only like a little glimpse into that Creole language that Kathy Park Hong constructs for the book. But while Chiang Rai-Lee is actually speaking to the native speaker of English, here the Creole registers my own inadequacy as a speaker of proper English, schooled in a way that parallels the historian, more so than the guide. And what I love about this book is that the reader's position also parallels that of the historian as we try and make sense of the guide, piece together from what we have of her language, what we know of her history, this very complex figure, a colonial subject. She comes from a lineage of yes men. There's a poem of that title, quote unquote, lineage of yes men. Collaborators, traitors, and then she becomes the voice of revolution. She's tortured, she's displaced. She plies her trade to survive and finds herself at the center of a new revolution. And, this is her father's counsel from one of the poems titled The Importance of Being English. You can be the best talker, but no point if you can't speak the other man's tongue. You can't chisel, con, plead, seduce, beg for your life. You can't do anything because you know not their language, so learn them all. And you can see in this, reading a passage like this, that the guide has taken this advice to heart. And given her facility with these multiple languages, she rises in the ranks of the tourist economy. She attests to its marvels, even as she tears at the opulent visions and opens up another world of squalor, oppression, destitution. And we start to see this horrific spectacle of globalization and late capitalism. We're not sure where her allegiance lies, but the power of her voice is undeniable. And indeed, it's our only access to this world. And like the historian, we must listen as best we can to this herald's voice. So I'm going to leave it at that point for today. I hope you're inspired to buy the book and read it. I, for one, really appreciate the pace that poetry offers, the slow kind of engagement and focus that it compels, especially now. So I encourage you to pick up this book and other books of poems. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye-bye.